All right, so yesterday, I am in the car with my son and my dad, and we are driving over to the Illinois football game, and I get a text from Brian saying, "Can you teach Sunday school tomorrow? Can you cover for me?" So the good news is I had an extra hour last night to prepare. So thank you, daylight savings time ending, right? So that's the bad news. The good news is this is a subject that we've dealt with before. Gary said we were going to be doing technology in the Christian, which was news to both Brian and I this morning. Actually, it's more like media in the Christian. So there is a technological aspect to it, I suppose. I hope none of you brought your computer for me to get the viruses off of or anything like that. That doesn't work out. Edwin's got to help me with that. But so I looked back at my notes. Brian and I actually co-taught a class here in 2012 dealing with social media. And some of you may remember that. Most of you have probably endeavored to forget that. But I looked back. I had the notes still from that class in 2012. That was my first time on the elder board. I think I was on it from 11 to 14. And it was a big subject at the time, right? Social media had really just, in the last 5 years at that point, become a major part of our life. And I want to say, and maybe someone can correct me, I think it was like 2007 or so when like people really started using social media, Facebook, as a major thing that everybody was on. Would you agree with that, Dan? You're shaking your head, yes. I know it came out before that, and you had MySpace before that and things like that, and stuff was starting to kind of happen, but it kind of coincided with the iPhone and the way smartphones advanced. In 2007, if you're a big nerd like Jared, you probably had one before 2007, would you say, about then?
It was 2007.
Oh, okay, so that was the date. All right, so I guess I had one. That's about when I got one too, so I guess I'm a big nerd too, but we started kind of having this new opportunity where we had these things in our pockets that we could share whatever we were doing at any moment with everybody who we think is our friend. And we started interacting on these platforms, and it was made possible because of the technology we had. Somebody came up to me at the pumpkin patch a couple weeks ago and asked me to take a picture. And we do that all the time, right? We tell our staff, take pictures for people. If you see them trying to take a selfie, ask them if they'd like you to take a picture, right? Well, I did that with this particular person, and it was actually a college student. And so this is what surprised me. They handed me a camera. And I was like, what the heck is this thing? I actually pushed the wrong button. I pushed the zoom button, and nobody uses cameras. No one in all these years, from 2014 until now, taking pictures for people, have I offered to take a picture of someone and they've handed me a camera. It's always been a phone. And that's just part of how things are. People that do have cameras typically are too expensive. They don't want you to touch it. But this was like an old film thing. I guess they were going to go to Walgreens later and try to get it developed or something. I guess do they still do that at Walgreens? I guess they do. So everything changed at that point. And so we had 4 or 5 years of just kind of consuming, right? We consumed whatever we could. These iPhones, these apps are so cool. Man, look, you share these things with everybody. And so we taught this class. And this may come as a surprise to you, but we kind of taught this class as like a good cop, bad cop, all right? I'll let you guess which one was the good cop between me and Brian and which one was the bad cop. But we kind of came at it that way, where I was giving more of the positive aspects of it, and he was coming at it more from a negative thing. There's things we should be concerned about. After looking back at my notes on that class, I would teach that class totally differently now. 10 years has passed since then. I've certainly, hopefully, grown and changed a little bit, but social media and technology has too. And there's more and more coming out about that. Now, I want to set your mind at ease. What this class is not going to be, and Brian will be teaching it. The only reason he's not here is because he's ill. And I think Edwin's going to do a week as well. What this class is not going to be at the end is just a big negative. We should be hermits and pull out of technology and never use those things and not be on the media, not be on social media. That's not what it's going to end up being. I hope what it ends up as is more like a driver's ed class. If you remember when you were 16 and you were in, or 15, I guess, and you were in driver's ed, and I have a 15-year-old right now that's doing her driving hours, and she's doing fine. We're doing okay with it, but they tell you about all the dangers. I don't know if you remember sitting in that class. They show you videos that are really scary of accidents. I remember, they probably don't do this anymore, but I remember they brought out a car, and it had this funky little contraption on it, and they put people in it and let you try it, and the thing actually shot like a little pin into the pavement. And when you heard that shot with that pin, you're supposed to slam on the brakes, and when the car came to a complete stop, it would shoot another pin. And the goal of it was to show you how long it actually takes you to stop once you're alarmed, all right, and they would show you, like, look, even with this, at this speed, it still takes this long to stop the car once you hit the brakes, and et cetera, et cetera. The point was to scare us, right? And I think they did it around like prom time, trying to dissuade people from drinking and being impaired while they drive. But the point of it was just it was a warning. A lot of what driver's ed was here are the dangers. And at some of the days in class, you're like, I don't even want to do this, right? But of course, travel is a reality of life, and we just need to be discerning, and we need to be aware of what it is that we're interacting with a vehicle. That's why they do this in driver's ed. Hopefully this will kind of act the same way. We tend, I think especially 10 years ago, we tend just to consume, and we just kind of do it thoughtlessly, and we don't really think through maybe what some of the underlying things are with what we're interacting with. And I think that was especially true with technology as it came into our lives and we just started using it, and the benefits were so wonderful, and some of the pitfalls and some of the unintended consequences of these things maybe snuck into our lives and we don't even know it. We don't even realize it. So like anything else, we need to be discerning. We need to interact with these things. Social media technology is not going to go away. Some of you probably wish it would. And it's going to be something that's a part of our life. So how do we as Christians then interact with it? How do we minister using it possibly? How do we use the benefits that it provides without falling into some of these unintended traps that have trapped so many of us, especially as it pertains to media, how we consume media, and the way we have been manipulated. Now, some of you were here on a Sunday night recently when I was able to share, and I used an article lightly. I went through some of it, and it's a really long article, and it was called "This is How Your Fear and Outrage Are Being Sold for Profit." I'm going to go through that a little bit more in detail than I did then. So some of you may say, well, I already heard that, and I get it, and that's fine. But this gives us an opportunity to really kind of delve into it. And again, the goal is just to get us to think, and it may lead to changing some behavior. Maybe it's changing to, maybe you start paying more attention to the settings on your social media so you can start to filter things a little bit differently. But ultimately, what we want is we want to have pure and holy hearts before the Lord. And so we want to be able to guard our hearts. Philippians 4, right? It says that we are to take all of our prayers and thanksgivings and petitions to the Lord. We're to be anxious about nothing. And the result is that we will have a peace that surpasses all understanding, and will guard our hearts. And so that's what we're aiming for, is we want, as Christians, to guard our hearts so we can maintain opportunity to ministry. And you know, I was kind of struck even this morning as Gary was going through how the Bible changes us, and it's so true. The more you consume it, the more you study, the more you read, the Lord uses it to change us. Well, on the flip side, I think anything you read changes you, and anything we consume, including social media, including news, including all those things. There is a war going on, and we're in it, and that war is for our attention, and it's for our soul, you know, in a sense, and we have to guard it. We have to guard our hearts. So before I get into this and start going through things, and I'm not gonna just talk the whole time. I'm gonna open it up too. I hope that some of you are willing to speak up, and we'll try to keep it under control as far as rabbit trails and things like that. But at the same time, this is something we're all kind of going through, and we're interacting with, and so I want to make sure it's not just a lecture. But I want to start with this. And I mentioned this in the sermon on the Sunday night here last summer. But, most of you know that our ministry at the Capitol, our ministry verse passage is 1 Timothy 2, where it says, "First of all, then, I urge that entreaties, prayers, petitions, and thanksgivings be made on behalf of all men, for kings and all who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires that all men be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth." So most of you know, that's where the command is to pray. And our ministry kind of focuses on the kings and those in authority because that's who we're ministering to. But there's a couple other things that sometimes we miss. Number one, entreaties and prayers be made on behalf of all people, right? It doesn't just say kings and those in authority. It's saying to pray. And this is this word urge, I urge you. I urge that entreaties and prayers is filled with passion. He's saying it's an urgent message. It's got a idea of urgency that we need to be doing this. We need to be endeavoring to it. And so Paul is calling Timothy to pray that way. But then he says why, right? He says what the result will be: to lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. So I think that the way that Paul writes this, that's a command. That's the result of a command. We should be endeavoring to be tranquil and quiet people, godly and dignified. And when you look at, you just scroll through your news feed, and unfortunately, that people hear, other saved people, friends from all over, you don't see a lot of that. You don't see that tranquil, quiet, godly, dignified spirit coming out. And even if it's there, the algorithm doesn't show it to you, right? And we're going to look at that a little bit. But then there's also this. It says this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior. So the prayers and the result of our behavior is good and acceptable in the sight of God. And then it says what God's desire is, right? It's our mission, that all men be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So in this passage, just this quick 4 verses, there's just so much. There's a command to pray. There's a result of the command, that we be quiet, dignified, tranquil, and godly. There's the point that God is pleased with this type of behavior. And then there's the goal or the mission, which is that all men be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So I'm going to use this as kind of a foundation for this class. And hopefully Brian will be able to springboard off of this. The good news about, the reason Brian needed me to do this is because we've had an ongoing conversation about this for like a decade. Back when I did this the first time, when I was on the elder board, stuff would come up in the elder meeting, and I would say, "Oh no, that's not the way it is anymore. This was, or whatever." And it was always because someone posted it on Facebook, right? Whatever the piece of information was, I knew because I was on Facebook all the time, and they started calling me. I think Mike probably dubbed me the Facebook elder. Somebody did, and it was. I think it was you. And so, and all that. Now, that's not working this time around because I haven't looked at Facebook in 4 months. Now, I'm not making I'm getting applause for that? Wow. Okay. Well, that's where this class is going then, I guess. All right. No, so I'm not saying that's a good thing either. I'm not saying that that's what everybody should do. But my perspective has shifted a little bit on and I'm still trying to decide to what degree I'm going to go back and participate because I still like Marketplace. Anyway, so anyway, we're gonna end up hopefully hashing through some of this and seeing where we should end up. And the reality is, not everybody in this room is going to end up in the same place. There will be some people that are like, we need to get off of it and stay off of it. Other people are like, well, no, we can't get off of it because this is how we communicate. I keep up with my kids from afar. I have friends over here. There's all kinds of reasons why we use it, and it's completely okay to use it. But hopefully we can go about it in such a way that we can maintain what Paul said here, to be tranquil and quiet, godly and dignified as we do. So I'm going to kind of get into this article now. This class is going to include a lot of scripture, but as we lay the foundation today, I want to kind of pay attention to what this article is, because I think it's the best one that I've seen. And it's from a few years ago, actually. This was actually pre-COVID pandemic. It was in 2017, so it was pre-2020 election. It was pre all the things that like we've looked at in the last few years, all the social unrest that came out during and after the pandemic, all the things that were going. This was actually before that. It was written in 2017. And there's been a couple of follow-ups to it, and it was done in an academic way. But what I like about it is the guy that wrote it, he actually I probably wouldn't agree with much on his politics from what I can tell, but he's pretty fair in how he presents it. And like I said, I don't agree with everything. And when he did a follow-up to this is how your fear and outrage are being sold for profit. And his follow-up was how to design better social media. So he gives his opinions on that. And I'm not going to necessarily spend a lot of time on that because it's all about how to customize your news feed to be more of what you want it to be and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as Christians, we have a totally different plane that we're on as far as how we interact with these things. So I actually want to read this first paragraph. He kind of starts this with, because I remember this, and it's very interesting, and it really lays a good groundwork. So it says, one evening in late October 2014, a doctor checked his own pulse and stepped away into a subway car in New York City. He had just returned home from a brief stint volunteering overseas and was heading to Brooklyn to meet some friends at a bowling alley. He was looking forward to this break. Earlier that day, he had gone for a run around the city. He'd grabbed coffee on the High Line. He had eaten at a local meatball shop, and when he woke up the next day, he was exhausted and had a slight fever. So he called his employer. Within 24 hours, he would become the most feared man in New York. His exact path through the city would be scrutinized by hundreds of people. The establishments he visited would be shuttered, and his friends and fiancé would be put into quarantine. Dr. Craig Spencer had contracted Ebola while he was treating patients in Guinea with Doctors Without Borders. He was not contagious until long after he was put into quarantine. He followed protocol to the letter in reporting his symptoms and posed no threat to anyone around him while he was in public. He was a model patient, a fact readily shared by all experts. This did not stop the media explosion, declaring an imminent apocalypse. A frenzy of clickbait and terrifying narratives emerged as every major news entity raced to capitalize on the collective Ebola panic. The physical damage done by the disease itself was small. The hysteria, however, traveling across the internet, shuttered schools, grounded flights, and terrified a nation. So interestingly, he puts a little. I wish I had something I could show this to you. But he shows some of the headlines that actually existed. CNN: Doctor in New York tests positive for Ebola. New York Times: Doctor in New York sick with Ebola. Fox News: Patient at New York City hospital tests positive for Ebola. And all of the subcontexts that they put on them were sensational. The reality was, experts say he was no threat to the public. He'd done everything right. There was no need for they did everything they were supposed to do. There was no need for the extra stuff to happen. So social media exploded on the topic, 6,000 tweets per second, leaving the CDC and public health officials scrambling to curtail the information that was wrong, spreading in all directions. The fear traveled as widely as the stories reporting on it. The emotional response and the media attached to it generated billions of impressions for companies reporting on it. Those billions were parlayed directly into advertising revenue. Before the hysteria had ended, millions of dollars worth of advertising real estate attached to Ebola-related material had been bought and sold algorithmically to companies. The terror was far more contagious than the virus itself and had the perfect network through which to propagate it, a digital ecosystem built to spread emotional fear far and wide. So that's a great story because you can probably look at almost anything in the news and see that type of thing. I actually had a conversation with a cousin of mine. He's a farmer this week, and he's kind of like, you're in the political stuff. Can you tell me why everything has to be so sensational in terms of news and why things are so polarized? And so we ended up having a conversation about what's happening here. So Every time your phone dings or you open your computer, we're walking into a battleground. There is a battle for our attention. And the aggressors are actually the architects of these medias, of the digital world. And what they use as weapons is they use apps, news feeds, notifications, things that come to us. And they're in our view and they're in our attention and our mind every time we look at any screen. And what they're attempting to capture is one of the most scarce resources we have, and that is our attention. We are so busy. We have so many things that we should be and could be paying attention to, and yet they're battling for it all the time. And the reason is because this is how they make money. Our captive attention is worth billions of dollars a year in advertising and subscription revenue. So they've worked really hard. You can look at anything. Anything that involves money gets pretty complicated pretty quick. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. I had somebody asking me this fall, have you ever gotten into competitions with the giant pumpkins? And I was like, no, I haven't. And we got into this conversation about these giant pumpkins that weigh like 1,500 to 2,000 pounds and the things you have to do for them. Well, I did read an article about it a few years ago, and they actually have these competitions. And the reality is that if you win any kind of award with these giant pumpkins, the seeds can be worth up to $10 a piece. And there's over 1,000 pumpkin seeds in a pumpkin, right? So these pumpkins be worth $10,000 just because you won an award with it. So what they've run into is everybody's competing now to win this stupid pumpkin prize, and they're cheating. There's little places where they'll take syringes, very, very fine syringes, and they'll pump milk into the pumpkin to make it weigh more so they can win the award to make money, because the guy that comes in second isn't making anything, right? So even something as silly as that turns into an issue because it involves a semi-large sum of money, right? When you're talking about billions of dollars, there is going to be a ton of research and an absolute amazing amount of attention and ingenuity put into how to capture that attention. So this probably sounds familiar to most of us, right? You have an idle moment. Nothing's going on. So what do? Pick up your phone, right? I'm guilty of this. I'm sure most of you are as well. And you want to check the time, or you want to look at the weather or whatever, and the next thing you know, you regain consciousness like 20 minutes later, and you're not even sure what you just did with the last 20 minutes, right? It could be a stranger's photo stream. It could be a surprising news article, a funny YouTube clip, anything like that. You didn't mean to, but 20 minutes just zoomed by. And the reality is that maybe we are at fault a little bit, but the reality is this stuff was designed to do this. It was made for this reason. This is the digital rabbit hole, he calls it. And you just tumbled down it, and it's funded by advertising, and it's aimed directly at you. So almost every free app or service that you download, it's free because they have advertising. I know my kids, when they download like a game or something, they're like, this one's free, right? And they get all excited because it's free. And I might actually let them download it sometimes because I'm not going to pay $2 for that game that they're going to play for an hour. But all of a sudden, then they're mad. Oh, it's got ads, right? It's like, well, of course it has ads. That's why it was free. And we know that's true, but that's kind of the interaction we have with that. You don't pay money out of your own pocket, but make no mistake, you are paying for these apps with your time, attention, and perspective. So this isn't like a small thing, It's not like these companies would rather have your $2 to buy the app. They would actually rather have your commitment to what they're offering. And this reality, as we've interacted with it, has actually changed how we see the world. It's changed our brains. One of the books I know Brian is going to be using is this phone by Tony Reinke. If you've ever seen it, how 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. It's a really good book. I don't know how many of you have read this book. I'm probably, Dan, I thought you and I have talked about this book before. It's a really, really interesting read. I recommend it, and maybe as you go through this class, this will be a good one. It's got some really, really good stuff in it. Forward was written by John Piper. It is coming from a Christian perspective. So anyway, there will be quite a bit from that. I actually told my daughter, who just got her first phone, that I was going to make her read that, and I just realized today when I was preparing that I haven't done that to her yet. So she's going to be reading that pretty soon here. So our phones, our devices, our social media, the way it changes us. And we need to be aware of that. So before I go any further, I do want to say the answer to this is not going to be to go back to the phone on the wall. We watched a movie the other night, and the phone rang, and they picked it up, and I was messing with my kids. I'm like, that's a phone, guys, you know. And they were like, we know. So they didn't appreciate the dad joke, I guess. But that's but we can't. We're not going back to that, right? We're not going back to a phone on the wall. I know some of you are like, I still have a phone on the wall, and that's okay. Yeah, that's okay, Jeff. So the reality is, we're not going to just cast that all aside. We're not going to kind of become hermits who stay away from everything. But I think a sober evaluation of the strategies that they're using to capture our attention, to change our mind, to affect really our hearts. It's good to be aware of these things so that we can discern political things, global things, to discern how to treat people and what's happening within our own hearts. So as we go on, I'm going to stop there. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add, or anything that they think I just said that's ridiculous? I'm fine with that too.
Well, you
Yeah.
mentioned about people think they've got to be on their phone because they got to communicate. Right?
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, they're failing to communicate because they're trying to do it all by the phone. They're not getting face to face, talking to people. They're neglecting certain ways of communication.
Yeah. What did Gary last week? I think Gary called social media the great head fake. Right, we're losing communication with people in relationships for this, and it's yeah. I think a head fake's a good way to put it. So, Kim?
Well, biggest thought I had is all sides are doing this. You know, we have confirmation bias, so
Mm-hmm.
maybe some of us more conservative, we prefer Fox News as opposed to CNN. Both sides are doing it,
Yeah, they are 100%.
and we need to be aware of our confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And not suck into what we prefer.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
All right, I'm going to get to that. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And this stuff shows you more of what you prefer because they want you to engage with it. So yeah, absolutely. Mike, were you going to say something?
I don't know if you can answer this question or not. Many young people seem to be able to connect to people well, like with texting.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was just like it was eyeball to eyeball communication.
Yeah.
To me, that is like a mystery. How can that be? You want to answer that?
I got an answer.
Good. Right.
So it's anonymity. Like, I don't have to have a direct conversation looking at somebody in the eyes and see them being disappointed or have an emotional reaction. I don't have to worry about the emotional reaction because now I'm nowhere near that person when I'm communicating. And it's just like communicating online. Like, I can say horrible things online to strangers because I don't have to deal with their reaction.
Yeah, we're going to kind of get to that too. Yeah, you're right. I think part of it too is comfort zone too. Like, so there's certain things, even for me, who I'm not as old as you, Mike, but I'm not as young as some of the people you're talking about, right? There's certain things I would rather text, but there's certain things that can't text that we should be face to face. I think you would rather never text if possible, right? And there's kids that would rather always text if possible, maybe partially because of what Brent just said and other factors. But yeah, some of it's just familiarity and comfort, right, in that, and there could be underlying things there as well. But so the big word, all right, and I kind of went through this last summer, the big word is engagement. So every time we've had a major breakthrough in technology, the world has changed in some way, and initially it's always very positive and fun, you know. I even thought about, so if you're ever in Detroit, you go to the Henry Ford Museum. It's an amazing place. Gone there a couple times, I absolutely love it. Just a neat place to see American ingenuity, and they talk about how the world changed with the automobile and different things like that. But then they have like a video that shows all the things that happened after the automobile came out, things you never think about, right? All of a sudden now with cars, a few years later, there's a need for highways that didn't exist before. And then there was the interstate system. And then the interstate system, Detroit had the first fully finished loop. And when they had that loop done, all of a sudden the suburbs became a reality. And people could get from the suburbs to work, and they didn't have to live in the city anymore. And there's just all of these things that they kind of go through that's really neat. But it changed things, and they're not saying it's good or bad. They're just saying this is how that changed things. Well, the same thing happened then as you go through with the media, right? For many years, and Gary kind of talked about it with the scriptures this morning. For many years, the only influence there was word of mouth, right? Up until Gutenberg and the printing press. Well, then the printing press made it possible for pamphlets and for newspapers and different things to happen. And the reach of one person became a little bit bigger. And they were able to start actually using propaganda in ideas and wars and politics and all these types of things. And then as newspapers became more and more of a thing, eventually we had radio. And radio expanded that reach even more. And then TV even more. And now we have social media. You can see now, I'm always amazed. A nobody can have a huge, huge following. In fact, most of these YouTube people don't do anything, right? But they're famous because and all these people follow them because they go around and they give money to people in stores or whatever, you know? I mean, I know some of you enjoy that, and we've watched some of it with our kids, and it is kind of funny. It's fun. But how can that happen? Well, it's just the opportunities available. And ultimately, what they're looking at is engagement. How do you engage? So stepping back again one more time, the newspaper was able to engage people a little differently than word of mouth because you could actually show a picture. Same thing with books. You could actually leave it with them, and they could go back to the message over and over. The radio added the sound of someone's voice. It added another sense, right? And all of a sudden you can hear all these, whatever it is, news. I mean, I know in World War I, the radio was used big time for propaganda and for different war stuff, and people would listen to the news reports on the radio. Then the TV came along, and now you can see with your face, you can see with your eyes, you can see pictures, and you can see emotion, and you can see all this thing. And then social media comes around, and now you have all of that, plus it's your friends saying it. Someone you know is saying it, so it's more trustworthy. I saw a meme one time that said, how is it that the same people that told me not to believe everything you see on TV, they believe everything on social media? Right? Well, the answer to that is someone they know said it, and so they trust it, even if that person didn't verify the information. And that's kind of how these levels of engagement with us have grown and grown and grown over time. We have an election. We're getting ready to vote Tuesday, right? And so all this stuff's happening. I was kind of interesting in the primary. I mean, did you guys get any mail other than political stuff for like 5 months? It was crazy every day. I'm like, this is the same mailer I got yesterday. Why are we back to print? I thought we were, done with print. But it was kind of interesting. But then when I was working at Channel 20 years ago, it's been 15 years ago now, politicians spent 90% of their money on television. I mean, all the money went to TV. And the reason why is because of the big TV sales pitch, because it's all your senses. You can see, you can hear. And it's powerful. Well, now it's actually gone backwards. They're not spending that much of their percentage of their revenue, of their advertising dollars on TV. They're putting it on social media. If you listen to Spotify or Pandora, if you listen to it, they're all over the place, and they're using Facebook like crazy, and they're spending all kinds of money there as well. So this thing has really, really changed, and it's changed pretty quickly. But the difference between all those other mediums that I mentioned before social media and social media is the ability to engage your emotions. It's not that the other mediums couldn't do it, but this was created to do it. It was created to be able to influence you at a deeper level than these other things have been in the past. So when you think about the news, I'm going to kind of move toward the news now a little bit. So the word news actually just means it's plural of new things. That's how it came about. And people heard about something new, they would share it with each other, and they were limited by their physical proximity and word of mouth. But then, of course, I talked about the printing press, and then the news consisted of notes, kind of posted in public, right? Martin Luther, right, posted the 95 Theses. That's how he did it. That's how he got the word out. He just could post something. Between the 18th and 19th centuries, when newspapers became common, mostly, and this is kind of funny, this was interesting to read, they were all just opinion rags in the 1800s. And they were political essays, they were sensational stories, and muckraking. That's what newspapers were in the 1800s. We have this idea that everything was pure as the driven snow back then. We have this idea that, man, back when journalism was, now people, it's like, if you've ever been to the Lincoln Museum and walked through the first room is Mary Todd's dresses, but then the second room you walk into is all the newspaper articles. And you're like, man, they were worse than we are now. Jared.
You know what's also interesting about that is like in England when Spurgeon was really popular, they would print it in the news, like his sermons would be in the newspaper.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. They must have had to fill some space in the paper, and he was, you think about, though, that he was also a powerful voice. He was someone with influence, So, yeah.
But today we have sermons on YouTube.
Yeah, we do. Yep. Because we post them, and you're able to do that. And there's wonderful things like that. Gary talked this morning about the Bible opportunities we have with technology. There's a lot of really wonderful things like that is awesome, for us. So, absolutely. During and the lead up to World War I, unchecked propaganda from all sides in the news was at a fever pitch. So we're talking about early 1900s. And there was a massive fight for public opinion. And almost nothing that was written was factually accurate. But by the end of the war, it was clear that the information warfare was powerful. Probably as or more powerful than the weapons themselves. Was getting the people on their side back home. It could literally raise armies. It could incite violent mobs. It could destabilize whole nations. So in response to this systematic manipulation of the truth, in the 1920s, there was a big effort to have fact-driven journalism become something that would become the norm. Certainly in our culture and in the West, this was something that was pushed for. And so there was a push to kind of consolidate newspapers and have national media. And there's good things and bad things that come with that. Obviously, if you have one person or one bigger organization or country controlling it, you end up with a different set of issues. But the idea of journalism, and I took journalism classes. I was a broadcasting major, and I remember having some journalism classes. And they did attempt to get us and to steer us in those classes to be factually accurate, to, as much as possible, remove bias from the equation. But the reality is there's never been anything written that didn't have some sort of bias. There's no way that you can completely remove bias from something that you've written, and that's true for the journalists as well. So back in the day, the business model for this journalism model was you had an editorial filter that would take place. All right, so you have an event, right, this editorial filter, and the first question they would ask, is this important? Is this something people need to hear? And if the answer was no, they would kill it, and if it was yes, they would move on to the next one. Then they would have a reporting filter. Is this a well-sourced story? So do we have real sources? Do we have a paper trail? Do we have eyewitness accounts that we can verify and corroborate? If the answer was no, they would kill it. If it was yes, they would then sell it to the paper, and the advertisers then would pick up the bill and they would do that. Well, over time, the algorithm of social media has completely flipped that on its head. Now, the filter sounds more like this. This is how modern news works. Fox News, CNN, all of them, all right? There's an event. And the first question that would be asked is, could this be a headline that would make people click? It's not, is it important? It's, will it get clicks? Okay, if it's no, they kill it. If it's yes, they go to the next question. Remember, this is the point of reporting editing. The next question they ask is, do we have picture or video? If the answer is yes, it's on. If it's no, it's probably not going to get the clicks they want. So they sell it to advertisers at that point. And the other thing is, they used to only have 1 or 2 opportunities a day or a week to put this in and reach you. Now they got 24 hours a day, 365 days, a year that they can be in your ear with these things. So, do I have until 11:15? Okay, so we're done. Man, that went well. That went really fast. For me, maybe it didn't for you. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up in this way. Okay, what I've shared so far, there's a lot more that could be said. But the point is that everything is packaged from all sides, emotional, in an emotional way that grabs us. And the reality is that the emotions that affect us the most are fear and anger. And shared on that last summer, but the Bible has a lot to say about fear and anger. And in fact, there's 366 passages dealing with fear, whether it be fear not or fear God. And anger is throughout the scriptures too, right? Don't let the sun go down on your anger. We usually think about that in interpersonal relationships, but just as a sense, what does it say happens if we reside in anger? Anybody know? In Ephesians, gives the devil a foothold. Gives the devil an opportunity, right? So every day, as we expose ourselves to these things, to this intentional effort to manipulate us, we're giving the devil an opportunity. So there's all kinds of things we can do. You can train your algorithm on your social media by saying, I don't want to see this. I don't want to see this. You can say that, and it'll learn those things. You can also choose not to click on things that gives you that confirmation bias. A lot of us just continue to click and interact with the things that we agree with, and it just shows us more and more and more of the things that we agree with and takes us further into our confirmation bias. So there's a lot of things like that and that are happening. But I think at the end of the day, aside from the technical and technological things you can do to kind of protect yourself, to be careful, little eyes, what you see, right? We have this reality that we need to pray. We need to pray for people. We need to keep our mission the main thing, which is that this is the same as the Lord's mission, that he desires that all men be saved, come to a knowledge of the truth, and that we live in a way that leads us to tranquil, quiet in life and all godliness and dignity. So that's my point I wanted to stick with today. Brian's going to take off on this thing, and if he's watching this, he might be going, oh man, now I got to do something different next week. I hope not. But I'll stop there. Does anybody have any last comments?
Why does Oprah keep trying to sell me gummies?
Gummies? I haven't seen that one. Hey.
You notice when you click on the story, all of a sudden your email box,
Oh yeah.
there's all sorts of things attached to that.
Listen, I don't want to go all tinfoil hat on you guys, but I had a conversation with a lady the other day about taking my kids to Shields, and she immediately got ads about Shields. So, yeah, they're listening, right? Well, okay. You can still go to Shields. All right. You're dismissed.